Hi, my name is Al Pratt, and since 2013 it has been my privilege to serve as a director of the Rockford Area Museum. One of the highlights of our year here at the museum is always the second grade tours, and we felt terrible for the last 2 years. Those tours have been impossible because of the pandemic. We hope to make up for that a little bit today by showing you a video tour of the museum. We want you to enjoy it and look at it closely and consider coming back to visit once the museum is open. We'll look forward to seeing you, your teachers, and your parents. Thank you.
Good morning, children. Welcome to school in 1860. My name is Terry Clement. I'm going to start with a brief history about this school and how rural schools were established. In 1827, the first public school passed by the territorial government of Michigan recognized that education was a public responsibility and not the responsibility of an individual. It would be the responsibility of township and local government to establish school districts, raise taxes, and elect school officials. It is much the same today. It was determined the school district should not be larger than 9 square miles. Most were much smaller. The school districts were drawn to keep families together and within walking distance to school. Cortland Township has 36 square miles in it, so it was required to have 9 school districts, but in fact it had 8 school districts. But in 1838, the first group of settlers moved into the area north of Myers Lake, and in 1839 established the township of Cortland. Smith Lambkin came to what would become Rockford in 1844. In 1858, Cortland Township established school district number 8. The farm on that corner belonged to William Rounds. William was asked by the township to get his neighbors together and discuss the building of a school. By 1860, $126 was raised and the school was built and opened, and so became the Rounds Schoolhouse. Now we'll fast forward 100 years to 1960. And a new high school was built on the corner of 10 Mile and Northland Drive, and is now the Rockford North Middle School. The Round Schoolhouse had been unused since 1936. It was in need of much repair. The Rockford Rotary Club thought it would be a great idea to move the little schoolhouse to this location to show how much education had changed in 100 years. The school day was usually from 9 a.m. in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. Students were given a 15-minute break in the morning and another one in the afternoon, and they had a lunch hour from 12 noon to 1. Now I hope to turn this over to Jack Bolt.
Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the people that taught in these one-room schoolhouses. This is a picture of one of the ladies. She looks pretty mean, doesn't she? But some of them were very young. A teacher's job was to be at school 1 hour before school starts, and they would sweep out the classroom and bring in wood to fire up the stove there if it was cold outside. There's no toilets. You have an outhouse, and if it was a dark day, they might light those lanterns that you see on the wall. This bench right here, because the classroom consisted of boys and girls, if the teacher said, I want the 4th graders to come up, maybe 1 or 2 4th graders would come up and they would sit on this bench, and she would just kind of, talk about the assignments that they got. This ugly looking pail and this thing was your source of drinking water. This is what a kid brought to school. His mother would make him some food in here. This would be his cup, her cup, his cup, and inside here would be their lunch. So anyway, that sounds like it was 1,000 years ago or several hundred years ago, but I can tell you for sure, there are people walking around the streets of Rockford that went to one-room schoolhouses.
Well, hi. Welcome to the museum. I'm glad to see you. My name is Mrs. Critchell, And when we come to the museum, we always like to start here in the room that we call the woods, because 178 years ago, when Smith Lapham came here, this is what he saw. He saw the trees, and in some places in here you can even see the river down below, because that's all that was here. He wanted to come here and live, and he wanted to be able to have a way to live, so he had a plan. His plan was to cut down the trees, saw them up in a mill, and sell the lumber to make a living for his family. So now we're going to start the tour, and we're going to go around to the front room. Smith Lapham wasn't the first person that came here. There were other people that were here years and years before he even thought of coming here and looking around. And those people would be the Native Americans. Now, how we know that they were here is we've found some things that they've left behind. They didn't write any books or anything for us to read about what their life was like, but we found things that they left. So in this case, we have some arrowheads, and some of the ones in the middle that are kind of long, those are spears, because they used to spear their fish when they went fishing a lot. And then we have some baskets that they made, and even some pieces that if we could glue them together would make part of a bowl. But they lived here. They didn't live like we do. They didn't live in a house and everybody lived in that house for years and years and years and years. Instead, the Native Americans lived in a building that they made called a wigwam. And it was covered with skins from animals. It wasn't very big. It's kind of like a tent, and you could sleep inside of it. The cool thing about it is that they could take it apart, pack it up, put it on their back, and move. So they moved around a lot. They might live one place where the fishing was good, and then when they didn't catch any fish, they would go to another place where they knew they could catch rabbits or they could hunt deer, and then they would move on. Okay. This is a blown up, really big picture of this photograph that was taken 22 years after Smith Lapham came here. They've started a village. And it's kind of fun to look at this picture because you can see some things that have changed, but you learn a lot. You're looking towards the river. The river's tucked down here. Downtown Rockford is right about here. This is the Methodist church. So they have churches, they have houses, and some of them are barns because, of course, they had horses and things back in those days. And you can see that the roads are just dirt roads, no pavement. And look at the houses. Look at this barn right here. It's all made out of, I would ask you, and I would hope you would say, either boards or wood, because that's what they were making at the mill. They were cutting the trees into boards and selling them. That's how Smith Lapham made all of his money. And so that's what they're doing. And you see almost all these buildings, I don't see a single brick building here. They're all made out of wood. This is a model of a mill. It's not a sawmill. It happens to be a grist mill. So it means that in this mill, they just ground wheat up into flour instead of cut trees into logs. But it was run by water power. There was no electricity here 100 and some years ago. So they built the mill next to the river, and they put a wheel on the side of the mill that looked like this, and it's got little two wheels together, and there's boards in between, so water could get caught in these places between the two wheels. So the river would come along the side, the water would be moving really fast, it would get caught in the wheel, and it would spin. And that would make the saw inside the mill spin around. In this case, it's making the grist mill grinding stone turn around. So when people came to this area to work in the lumbering business, there were lumber camps around where men would go out in the wintertime and cut down trees. There's a picture of some guys sitting on a tree next to a river. They're going to float the logs down the river to the mill. And they had these big tools with a big hook on it here that they could move the logs so they didn't jam up together. They cut them down with axes and saws, and this is an auger to make a hole in the things. But they're sitting here. These guys are going to have their picture taken. And you know what? This was taken a very long time ago. But look at this guy right here. How many of you do those silly things when somebody asks to take your picture? So even though these guys are all sitting nice and smiling, we got to have one that's being silly, which I think is kind of cool. This is a stump of a tree that was cut down just across the street to just north of here in front of the credit union. It was a maple tree, I believe. And this isn't the whole stump. This is only half of the stump. So if I was to lay this on the floor, I'd have to put another one just like it to make a big round stump. In the lumber camps, they had to fix breakfast for a lot of guys. And so this big frying pan worked out really great for bacon or scrambled eggs or something. We've talked a lot about Smith Lapham. He was the first guy here, built a big house down the thing, and this is his picture. This is what he looked like. He came from the state of New York, and he settled here, and he lived here until he died in his 80s, so he was here for quite a long time. Here's the trains downtown, and this right here is a boxcar. It's on the train tracks. It's what now is the White Pine hiking trail downtown. And the train here was kind of important because when Smith Lapham came, it was a while before they had a train track here. And they decided, and when Smith Lapham came, you know what he did? He named the town Laphamville after himself. I could have come, if I came, I could have called it Critchelville. But anyway, he named it Laphamville. The railroad came, and they decided to put a railroad through Rockford. And they said, well, we don't want the town to be called Laphamville because that's too many letters to put on a sign. So you have to come up with a new name, a name that does not have any more than 8 letters. Well, they had a meeting in town, and somebody got up at the meeting. He just moved here. He was a minister at the Baptist church. He just moved here from Rockford, Illinois. And he said, you know, Rockford is a really good name, and it has 8 letters. So they had a vote, and they decided to call the new town, change the name from Laphamville to Rockford. Okay, our first stop is here. We like to stop with this case because it's just a case of glasses from a doctor that used to work here in Rockford, and he had all these glasses. The ones we think are kind of cool are these ones right here in the middle. You see how little they are? And they have green lenses. Now I would ask you, what do you think that these glasses would be used for? Well, the answer is they were used for chickens.
Good morning. I first have to ask you to pretend. I am in my kitchen in the early 1900s, and I don't have electricity. In today's museum, we have light, but I don't have any light. I can't just flip on a light switch. So I am going to, it's still dark, it's early morning, so I'm going to go in to my match box. I'm going to get a match, light a match, and come over to my oil lamp. There's oil in the bottom, and the wick has been soaked in oil. Now, I'm going to make breakfast this morning, and I have everything I need right here in my kitchen. I have chickens, so I have my egg all ready to go. My husband has milked the cow and has brought the milk into the creamer, into the cream can, and so I am going to make butter for my breakfast. So I'm going to take the cream off the top of the milk, put it in my churn. Inside here is a paddle, and I'm going to go up and down and up and down until the cream has clotted around the paddle. Put it in my butter pan, and I'm going to make butter. Now you can make butter too. Now you can take some heavy cream, put it in a clean peanut butter jar, and shake it and shake it and shake it, and you'll have butter. Okay, so I have my milk, I have my eggs, I have my breakfast table already set. And I'm going to make, now second graders don't always know what this is. They think it's a cheese grater. No, this is my toaster. I've baked my bread, I've made slices of bread, and I'm putting it in my toaster and putting the toaster on my, I have a gas stove. And so when it browns on the inside, I'm going to turn the slices around. So I have toast. So I have eggs, I have toast. I also might be lucky enough to have waffles. I have a waffle maker, and so with my milk and my eggs and everything I need in my Hoosier cabinet, this is a cabinet that was made in Indiana, so that's why it's called a Hoosier cabinet. So I have my flour, and I probably got my flour from a farmer next door, or maybe I could go into the store, a general store, or once in a while a peddler would come around, but he would have more of the utensils kinds of things. And sometimes I needed a chopper, so my husband made this chopper out of an old wheel. He cut it so that I now have a chopper. So everything I need, flour, utensils, I have here. I also, from the peddler, because I don't have bees, but from the peddler I bought wax because I also want to make candles. So I melt the wax, put it in here, put a wick down in here, and I have candles even so that my children can have a candle to study by. So I've made my candles, I've made my breakfast, and I'm going to now put some things away in my ice box. Now, ice boxes were a small way to keep things because, as you can see, there isn't much room in the ice box. Now, the iceman would come about once a week. I'd put a sign in my window saying I needed ice, and the iceman would bring a big chunk of ice from his wagon. He had a horse and wagon. He'd bring the big chunk of ice in and put it in here, and that cold ice would melt and go down into tubes behind and keep a few things cold. I also have a root cellar. That's a cellar that was dug into the side of a hill, and that's where I kept a lot of fruits and vegetables and canned goods. I have done a lot of canning. I have crocks. I have jugs to keep things. You might remember, if you saw The Wizard of Oz, you saw a picture of the people going into the root cellar when the tornado came. And that was a popular place to run if there was a tornado warning. Sometimes you may wonder where the iceman gets his ice. And sometimes I get guesses that he goes clear up to the Arctic Circle. No. In Michigan, we're lucky because he goes out in the wintertime and cuts ice from the frozen lakes. He cuts it into chunks, puts it in his wagon and covers it with sawdust and takes it into Rockford, at Lappleville, and has an ice house that's a log cabin with double walls, and the ice covered in sawdust stays clear until the lakes freeze again. Some states have to put their ice in caves, or in some states they have to keep the ice in a real cold spring water. But here in Rockford we have plenty of lakes, and so he could get his ice from any of the surrounding lakes. Today is wash day. Now, I don't have a lot of clothes because not like today where you can wear a different outfit every day. The children have school clothes, play clothes, and a Sunday go to meeting clothes. And on Monday I have to wash and I have to use my scrub board. And again, I have bought my soap from the peddler. I can make my own soap, but I bought my soap from the peddler. And I wash the clothes in my wash tub. And in order to get water, I can't go into my kitchen. I don't have a bathroom, so I can't open a tap and have water. I have to pump my water out of a well. I have to put it in a bucket and I have to carry it in and put it on my stove to make it warm enough to wash my clothes. So it's not easy to do a day's wash. Then I used to just wring my clothes out, and then somebody invented this. It's a wringer, so I can wring my clothes out into this. And somebody also invented this, which I can plunge up and down to wash my clothes. And finally, someone, when electricity was invented, somebody in 1912 made this electric washing machine, which was just wonderful because I didn't have to scrub anymore. Then I wring my clothes. This wringer is electric, and you have to be very careful because a lot of pinched fingers happen trying to rinse the clothes, wring the clothes out. And then I hang my clothes on the clothesline for them to dry. In the wintertime, we think I would take my clothes in and hang them in the parlor rather than let them freeze outside. So this was a children's tub, but the baby would get washed, and then the next child would get in, put a little more water in, warm some more water, put it in, and finally, if you were the oldest, you took the last bath.
Hello, I am Madge Bolt, and this is the parlor. I don't suppose this is an old-fashioned living room, and I don't suppose your living room looks anything like this, second graders. This is what it used to be, and there was no electricity in those days. And if you look at the chandelier, candles lit the living room. Now, and it was cold, so oak logs went in here, and that warmed it up. This is a spittoon. Every living room had one. The men in those days, they chewed tobacco, and when they got sick of it, they spit it out in the spittoon. This is a fainting couch. Long time ago, it was style for ladies to wear corsets, and they tied them really tight because it was style to have thin waistlines. And they got faint, so they invented the fainting couch lest they fall on the floor, and they would lay down in the fainting couch. No air conditioning. This was it. Little Lord Fauntleroy suit. The boys, when they would get dressed up, they would look like this. Isn't that something? This is a pump organ. This is an old-fashioned organ, and you pump the pedals, and the air goes up in here, and that makes the sound. You can pull these in and out, and you can play the organ. This is a gramophone. This played music. You wound it up, and it was before the Victorrola. This was a vacuum cleaner. Doesn't look like a vacuum cleaner, does it? There was a hose attached.
Hello, my name is Carla Blanford, and I'm going to take you through this section of the Rockford Area Historical Museum. We're going to start by looking at this photograph up here of a farmer's field in Rockford. And I want you to take a look at this fence and think about what part of the tree that is made from. When you take a look, see what it is. It's the part that's under the ground. These are the roots of the tree. Now, when the farmers in Rockford would take down a big tree, they would send the trunk part to the sawmill to make boards for houses, businesses, and they would use the smaller branches and the twigs for heating their home and using for cooking. And then they would dig out the roots and put them up as fences. They wanted to keep the animals in their own area and keep them out of the crops. So here's the animals in this section of the field, and here are the farmers' crops, which they would not want the animals to get into. They would also like to keep their animals in their own area instead of going into a neighboring area. One of the crops raised in Rockford were beans, and this is called a bean sorter. And so someone would sit here and work the petals of this bean sorter. This would move right along with all the beans on it, and then the good beans would go here into the bag and the bad ones would go over here. This is called a honey extractor, and they would take the honeycombs from the bees, put them in here in a little container, and then they would swirl this around. They would take this crank and it would go round and round and round, and it would pull all the honey out of the wax, and then they could turn this spigot at the bottom and the honey would come out. And of course this would have been up high so that they could put a bucket under there and get the honey. We're moving from the farm to the city now. You can see the farmer's house and some of the fields around the farm, but now we're going into the city of Rockford. We're going to take a look right down here. I think you will recognize what this is. It was important to early Rockford and it's still important today, and that is the Rockford Dam. And I know many people like to gather down there. It's always a popular place and it was always important to our community. Then we're going to take a look up here at a city street in Rockford, and this is the corner bar. You see these gentlemen parading down the street. They're carrying flags and flowers, and they're dressed in their very best clothing. They're on their way up to the Rockford Cemetery to have a memorial service for the people who served in the armed forces from the community of Rockford. Then we're going to take a look right here. You see these ladies are all dressed in their finest clothing, but they're all working on something, working on some little kind of needlework. And this was before you could go to Kleenex and pull a Kleenex out of a box. Everyone carried a handkerchief. Now that might be one that a child would carry, and these are ladies, but men carried them as well, and they would have great big colorful handkerchiefs that they would take out in the fields, and then they might have a fancier one that they would use when they were dressing up. Now these ladies are part of a literary society. Now a literary society is like a book club. In fact, you might have a mom or dad who belonged to a book club. People in early Rockford wanted to keep up to date on current affairs and new books, so they would get together to discuss these things. So education has always been very important in Rockford. Then I would like to have you take a look down at the bottom. And there is a street in Old Rockford, and you can see there are no automobiles down on the street. We just see buggies and wagons and the dirt street, but then there would have been some planks on the sidewalk because that would keep people from getting their feet dirty when they went in and out of the different businesses. Okay, this is something that's very important to our museum. This is a Victorrola, and it plays music on records. This is called a record. It might be like the CDs that you have now, but I'm going to put this on, and then I want you to notice that there's no cord here. So there's no way to plug it in. So you operate this by turning this crank, and it winds up a spring underneath the turntable. So when I turn it on, this will start going around. When I put the needle on, you'll hear music. Now, if you had company at your house and you'd say to yourself, oh, I wish that could be just a little bit louder, there's no way to just turn up the volume, but how we can make it louder is open these doors, and you can see a lot more sound comes out then. And then someone would have to stay near the Victorrola, because when this wound down, somebody would have to come up here, wind it up again, and then you might want to change the record too. So we have records are stored down here. This is a mail buggy. It's one of our treasures for our museum. This mail buggy was actually used by a man named George Graves from 1917 to 1928. He drove this out into rural Rockford and delivered the mail. Now his family sent this out to be refurbished, and then they donated it to our museum. So we're very happy to have it, since it was actually used by a Rockford resident. Over here is what a post office would look like. Now some people came to the post office to pick up their mail rather than having it delivered at home. And every family would have a box. Your family's name would be right here, and all the letters for your family would be in this slot. So you might come into the post office and say, will you give me the mail for the Smith family? And the postmaster would just get the mail and hand it to you.
When the telephone came to Rockford, the first phones were very, very much like this. We didn't have wireless phones. Your purse wouldn't ring for you back then, or your pocket wouldn't ring for you, because you had to pick up the phone, talk into the speaker, and when you picked up your phone, your telephone number light would turn red here. So if my number was 43, I would sit as an operator, and I have this headphone on, and I would say, number please. And then the person calling would say, I want to talk to number 56. So I would take 56 out of here and take 43 out of here, and I'd cross my wires. So that's where the slogan came, don't get your wires crossed. Now all of the signals came through telephone wires, and I had to be very, very careful if I called somebody and tried to tell a secret, because it was a party line. That meant that there were probably about 5 people who could pick up their phone and listen in. When we finally got the dial phone, we still needed a telephone operator, because she had a dial, so she would have my number light up, but then she would cross the wires because I had dialed the number that I wanted to get.
Well, our next stop in the South Room is a pharmacy cabinet. Back in the day, it wasn't like going to Meijer and walking up and down the aisles and choosing what you wanted to cure your cold or your cough. You would go to the pharmacy, and a pharmacist would help you out with your selection. In this cabinet are many of the many years older medicines that were used, and these were the things that the pharmacist would gather for you, and typically they would be in a cabinet like this behind the counter, and you would explain your problem to the pharmacist, and he would decide what you needed to help cure it and go and grab you the appropriate medicine. To the left there is an old cash register that dates way back to the early 1900s, probably 1920, 1930. And on the right, the big silver thing you see facing you is a candy jar that were typically on the counter where kids could grab handfuls of penny candy and get them weighed or rung up on this cash register to take home. But that was a pharmacy back around the turn of the century, much different than we're used to today. In this corner of the museum, we have something really interesting. This is an old doctor's desk. And not just any doctor's desk. It was the desk of Dr. Gerald DeMagd, who was the doctor here in Rockford for many, many years. A lot of Dr. DeMagd's things are in this exhibit, including his bag that sits on the chair, and another one he had there that's on the floor that you may not see in this shot. And the doctor would have that bag, and he would need it because the doctor would come to your house. If you weren't feeling well, it wasn't a matter of going online and making an appointment and hoping you could get in to see someone within the next week or so. You would call the doctor, and if you weren't feeling well, he'd come out to your house, check you out, and decide what the course of action should be. Very often he would prescribe medicine or just give you some over-the-counter medicine that you would go to that pharmacy we were talking about to get it selected. Or sometimes he would even tell you to go to the hospital because you had something more serious going on. But in any respect, the family doctor was a very, very important part of everyone's lives. Now that picture you see on the wall is Dr. DeMagd giving Rockford's very first polio shot. And it looks like that gal is screaming from getting that shot, but we're told that in reality she was laughing so hard she couldn't hardly stop, maybe at the notoriety of getting her picture taken. But for whatever reason, she was laughing. That's not a scream. And it's interesting to note that back then, people were taking it very, very seriously to get this brand new polio vaccine to prevent children from catching polio. And here we are now, many, many years later, getting vaccinated again, and this time for the COVID-19. Along the south wall of the museum, we have that space dedicated very primarily to military. It also includes some information about scouting. But a major part of the military exhibit is this salute to John Sjogren. John Sjogren was a Rockford native who became a national hero during World War II. His exploits were unbelievable. His bravery was unquestionable. And we have a brochure available that explains it all. We're very fortunate to have this exhibit here because it includes the actual Medal of Honor that Sjogren received from President Harry Truman. This Medal of Honor is bestowed upon very, very few people in this country, and we're honored to have a Medal of Honor winner come from Rockford. As we look further down that wall, you'll see other military exhibits and some law enforcement exhibits and a variety of things that we think you'll find interesting. Down at the far end of this section, you'll see a quilt that has a picture of an airplane in the middle of it and a lot of names all around the outside. That quilt was made by women members of the Women's Rockford Bowling League to raise money to help build a bomber that would be used in the war. Everyone in the country pitched into the war effort, whether it was saving grease that could be reused by the military, whether it was saving tin cans that would be reused for manufacturing, or in this case, a quilt made by the dedicated women of Rockford's Bowling League to help raise money for a bomber. Another one of our most prized possessions here is this old player piano. We've had this for a long time. It sat in the old museum and was not kept up very well because, quite frankly, maintaining it costs a lot of money. And money is something that we're always short of. But when we raised money to move the museum from the old facility to this new one, we decided it was time to get the piano fixed. Well, we hired someone to do it, and he was unable to get it totally functional. It used to operate by operating foot pedals that would pump air that would come through a little blower here and go through the holes that you see on that paper roll. It is those holes in that paper roll that activated the keys and played the piano. Unfortunately, now we can't pump it, but we've hooked it up to an electric pump so that you can hear how it worked and see how this piano actually plays itself. Well, I think that gives you an idea of how an old player piano worked. One thing I didn't mention is that there are words printed on that roll of paper, and families would gather around the piano and look over each other's shoulders, see the words, and sing along, and that was a big night, a Saturday night thing that families would do. All right, the last on our stop around the south room of the museum is the school showcase. And this case is very, very interesting. You'll see an old trophy on the wall, an actual trophy from a Rockford Championship baseball team. You'll see a lot of interesting pictures in the showcase and musical instruments from the old bands and old baseball equipment. There's also a picture of the school that in 1922 burned to the ground. And all the kids were very, very happy because surely there would be no school for a while because the only school in town just burnt down. Well, they were surprised because the school burnt on Thursday night to a Friday morning, and school was back in session in Rockford on Monday. The children and the students only missed one day of school, and that's because the town pitched in. They held classes in people's homes, in businesses, in churches, or anywhere they could gather a class. And they taught the classes all over town until a new school was built. The school that was built to take its place is now the school administration building, and at one time that building housed every student in Rockford from kindergarten through the 12th grade. One thing in particular to note on this showcase is this bell under a little glass globe. That is the actual school bell that was used by Amy Lapham. Amy Lapham was Smith Lapham's daughter, and when he formed the town, one of the first things he said was that our children that come here to live have to be educated. So he appointed his daughter, the 17-year-old Amy, to be the town school teacher, and she taught all of the children. And from that day forward, education has always been very, very important to the residents and the citizens of Rockford.